Sympathy. When thy gaze turns it on thine own soul, be most severe. But when it falls upon a fellow man, let kindliness control it, and refrain from that belittling censure that brings forth from common lips like weeds from marshy soil. Ella Wheeler Wilcox. I do not ask the wounded person how he feels. I myself become the wounded person. Walt Whitman. We can only sympathize with others insofar as we have conquered ourselves. We cannot think and feel for others while we are engaged in condoling with and pitying ourselves, cannot deal tenderly and lovingly with others while we are anxious for our own preeminence or for the exclusive preservation of ourselves, our opinions, or our own generally. What is sympathy but thoughtfulness for others in the forgetfulness of self? To sympathize with others, we must first understand them, and to understand them, we must put away all our personal preconceptions concerning them, and must see them as they are. We must enter into their inner state and become one with them, looking through their mental eyes and comprehending the range of their experience. You cannot, of course, do this with a being whose wisdom and experience are greater than your own, nor can you do it with any if you regard yourself as being on a higher plane than others, for egotism and sympathy cannot dwell together. But you can practice it with all those who are involved in sins and sufferings from which you have successfully extricated yourself, and though your sympathy cannot embrace and overshadow the man whose greatness is beyond you, you can place yourself in such an attitude towards him as to receive the protection of his larger sympathy, and so make for yourself an easier way out of the sins and sufferings by which you are still enchained. Prejudice and ill will are complete barriers to the giving of sympathy, while pride and vanity are total barriers to its reception. You cannot sympathize with a person for whom you have conceived a hatred. You cannot enjoy the sympathy of one whom you envy. You cannot understand the person whom you dislike, or he for whom, through animal impulse, you have framed an ill-formed affection. You cannot see him as he really is, but only see your own imperfect notions of him, see only a distorted image of him through the exaggerating medium of your ill-grounded opinions. To see others as they are, you must not allow impulsive likes and dislikes, powerful prejudices, or egotistic considerations to come between you and them. You must not resent their actions or condemn their beliefs and opinions. You must leave yourself entirely out and must, for the time being, assume their position. Only in this way can you become in rapport with them, and so fathom their life, their experience, and understand it. And when a man is understood, it becomes impossible to condemn him. Men misjudge, condemn, and avoid each other because they do not understand each other, and they do not understand each other because they have not overcome and purified themselves. Life is growth, development, evolution, and there is no essential distinction between the sinner and the saint. There is only a difference in degree. The saint was once a sinner. The sinner will one day be a saint. The sinner is the child. The saint is the grown man. He who separates himself from sinners, regarding them as wicked men to be avoided, is like a man avoiding contact with little children because they are unwise, disobedient, and play with toys. All life is one, but it has a variety of manifestations. The grown flower is not something distinct from the tree. It is a part of it. It is only another form of leaf. Steam is not something apart from water, but it is another form of water. And in like manner, good is transmuted evil. The saint is the sinner, developed and transformed. The sinner is one whose understanding is undeveloped, and he ignorantly chooses wrong modes of action. The saint is one whose understanding is ripened, and he chooses right modes of action. The sinner condemns the sinner, condemnation being a wrong mode of action. The saint never condemns the sinner, remembering that he himself formerly occupied the same place, but thinks of him with deep sympathy, regarding him in the light of a younger brother or a friend, for sympathy is a right and enlightened mode of action. The perfected saint, who gives sympathy to all, needs it of none, for he has transcended sin and suffering, and lives in the enjoyment of lasting bliss. But all who suffer need sympathy, and all who sin must suffer. When a man comes to understand that every sin, whether of thought or deed, receives its just quota of suffering, he ceases to condemn and begins to sympathize, seeing the sufferings which sin entails, and he comes to such understanding by purifying himself. As a man purges himself of passions, as he transmutes his selfish desires and puts underfoot his egotistic tendencies, he sounds the depths of all human experiences, all sins and sufferings and sorrows, all motives and thoughts and deeds, and comprehends the moral law in its perfection. Complete self-conquest is perfect knowledge, perfect sympathy, and he who views men with a stainless vision of a pure heart views them with a pitying heart, sees them as a part of himself, not as something defiled and separate and distinct, but as his very self, sinning as he has sinned, suffering as he has suffered, sorrowing as he has sorrowed, and yet, withal, glad in the knowledge that they will come, as he has come, to perfect peace at last. The truly good and wise man cannot be a passionate partisan, but extends his sympathy to all, seeing no evil in others to be condemned and resisted, but seeing the sin which is pleasant to the sinner, and the after sorrow and pain which the sinner does not see, and when it overtakes him, does not understand. A man's sympathy extends just so far as his wisdom reaches, and no further, and a man only grows wiser as he grows tenderer and more compassionate. To narrow one's sympathy is to narrow one's heart, and so to darken and embitter one's life. To extend and broaden one's sympathy is to enlighten and gladden one's life, and to make plainer to others the way of light and gladness. To sympathize with another is to receive his being into our own, to become one with him, for unselfish love unites, and he whose sympathy reaches out to and embraces all humankind and all living creatures has realized his identity and oneness with all, and comprehends the universal love and law and wisdom. Man is shut out from heaven and peace and truth only insofar as he shuts out others from his sympathy. Where his sympathy ends, his darkness and torment and turmoil begins. For to shut others out from our love is to shut ourselves out from the blessedness of love, and to become cramped in the dark prison of self. Whoever walks a furlong without sympathy walks to his own funeral dressed in a shroud. Only when one's sympathy is unlimited is the eternal light of truth revealed. Only in the love that knows no restriction is the boundless bliss enjoyed. Sympathy is bliss. In it is revealed the highest, purest blessedness. It is divine, for in its reciprocal light all thought of self is lost, and there remains only the pure joy of oneness with others, the ineffable communion of spiritual identity. Where a man ceases to sympathize, he ceases to live, ceases to see and realize and know. One cannot truly sympathize with others until all selfish considerations concerning them are put away, and he who does this and strives to see others as they are, strives to realize their particular sins, temptations and sorrows, their beliefs, opinions and prejudices, comes at last to see exactly where they stand in their spiritual evolution, comprehends the arc of their experience, and knows that they cannot for the present act otherwise than they do. He sees that their thoughts and acts are prompted by the extent of their knowledge, or their lack of knowledge, and that if they act blindly and foolishly, it is because their knowledge and experience are immature, and they can only come to act more wisely by gradual growth into more enlightened states of mind. He also sees that though this growth can be encouraged, helped and stimulated by the influence of a riper example, by seasonable words and well-timed instruction, it cannot be unnaturally forced. The flowers of love and wisdom must have time to grow, and the barren branches of hatred and folly cannot be cut away all at once. Such a man finds the doorway into the inner world of those with whom he comes in contact, and he opens it and enters in, and dwells with them in the hidden and sacred sanctuary of their being. And he finds nothing to hate, nothing to revile, nothing to condemn in that sacred place, but something to love and tend, and in his own heart room only for greater pity, greater patience, greater love. He sees that he is one with them, but that they are another aspect of him, that their natures are not different from his own except in modification and degree, but they are identical with it. If they are acting out certain sinful tendencies, he has but to look within to find the same tendencies in himself, albeit perhaps restrained or purified. If they are manifesting certain holy and divine qualities, he finds the same pure spirit within himself, though perhaps in a lesser degree of power and development. One touch of nature makes the whole world kin. The sin of one is the sin of all. The virtue of one is the virtue of all. No man can be separate from another. There is no difference of nature, but only difference of condition. If a man thinks he is separated from another by virtue of his superior holiness, he is not so separated, and his darkness and delusion are very great. Humanity is one, and in the holy sanctuary of sympathy, saint and sinner meet and unite. It is said of Jesus that he took upon himself the sins of the whole world. That is, he identified himself with those sins, and did not regard himself as essentially separate from sinners, but as being of a like nature with them, and his realization of his oneness with all men was manifested in his life, as profound sympathy for those who, for their deep sins, were avoided and cast off by others. And who is it that is in the greatest need of sympathy? Not the saint, not the enlightened seer, not the perfect man. It is the sinner, the unenlightened man, the imperfect one, and the greater the sin, the greater is the need. I came not to call the righteousness but sinners to repentance, is the statement of one who has comprehended all human needs. The righteous man does not need your sympathy, but the unrighteous, he who, by his wrongdoing, is laying up for himself long periods of suffering and woe, is in need of it. The flagrantly unrighteous man is condemned, despised, and avoided by those who are living in a similar condition to himself, though for the time being they may not be subject to his particular form of sin, for that withholding of sympathy and that mutual condemnation which are so rife is the commonest manifestation of that lack of understanding in which all sin takes its rise. While a man is involved in sin, he will condemn others who are likewise involved, and the deeper and greater his sin, the more severe will be his condemnation of others. It is only when a man begins to sorrow for his sin, and so to rise above it, and into the clearer light of purity and understanding, that he ceases from condemning others, and learns to sympathize with them. But this ceaseless condemnation of each other, by those who are involved in the fierce play of the passions, must needs be, for it is one of the modes of operation of the great law which universally and eternally obtains, and the unrighteous one, who falls under the condemnation of his fellows, will the more rapidly reach a higher and nobler condition of heart and life, if he humbly accepts the censure of others as the effect of his own sin, and resolves henceforward to refrain from all condemnation of others. The truly good and wise man condemns none. Having put away all blind passion and selfishness, he lives in the calm regions of love and peace, and understands all modes of sin, with their consequent sufferings and sorrows. Enlightened and awakened, freed from all selfish bias, and seeing men as they are, his heart responds in holy sympathy with all. Should any condemn, abuse, or slander him, he throws them around the kindly protection of his sympathy, seeing the ignorance which prompts them to so act, and knowing that they alone will suffer for their wrong acts. Learn, by self-conquest and the acquisition of wisdom, to love him whom you now condemn, to sympathize with those who condemn you. Turn your eyes away from their condemnation and search your own heart to find, perchance, some hard, unkind, or wrong thoughts which, when discovered and understood, you will condemn yourself. Much that is commonly called sympathy is personal affection. To love them who love us is human bias and inclination, but to love them who do not love us is divine sympathy. Sympathy is needed because of the prevalence of suffering, for there is no being or creature who has not suffered. Through suffering, sympathy is evolved. Not in a year or a life or an age is the human heart purified and softened by suffering, but after many lives of intermittent pain, after many ages of ever-recurring sorrow, man reaps the golden harvest of his experiences and garners in the rich, ripe sheaves of love and wisdom. And when he understands, and understanding, he sympathizes. All suffering is the result of ignorantly violated law, and after many repetitions of the same wrong act, the same kind of suffering resulting from that act, knowledge of the law is acquired, and the higher state of obedience and wisdom is reached. Then there blossoms the pure and perfect flower of sympathy. One aspect of sympathy is that of pity for the distressed or pain-stricken, with a desire to alleviate or help them bear their sufferings. The world needs more of this divine quality. For pity makes the world soft to the weak and noble for the strong. But it can only be developed by eradicating all hardness and unkindness, all accusation and resentment. He who, when he sees another suffering for his sin, hardens his heart and thinks or says, "It serves him right," such a one cannot exercise pity, nor apply its healing balm. Every time a man acts cruelly towards another, be it only a dumb creature, or refuses to bestow needed sympathy, he dwarfs himself, deprives himself of ineffable blessedness, and prepares himself for suffering. Another form of sympathy is that of rejoicing with those who are more successful than ourselves, as though their success were our own. Blessed indeed is he who is free from all envy and malice, and can rejoice and be glad when he hears of the good fortune of those who regard him as an enemy. The protecting of creatures weaker and more indefensible than oneself is another form in which this divine sympathy is manifested. The helpless frailty of the dumb creation calls for the exercise of the deepest sympathy. The glory of superior strength resides in its power to shield, not to destroy. Not by the callous destruction of weaker things is life truly lived, but by their preservation. All life is linked and kin, and the lowest creature is not separated from the highest by greater weakness, but by lesser intelligence. When we pity and protect, we reveal and enlarge the divine life and joy within ourselves. When we thoughtlessly or callously inflict suffering or destroy, then our divine life becomes obscured, and its joy fades and dies. Bodies may feed bodies and passions, but man's divine nature is only nurtured, sustained, and developed by kindness, love, sympathy, and all pure and unselfish acts. By bestowing sympathy on others, we increase our own. Sympathy given can never be wasted. Even the meanest creature will respond to its heavenly touch, for it is the universal language which all creatures understand. I have recently heard a true story of a Dartmoor convict whose terms of incarceration in various convict stations extended to over 40 years. As a criminal, he was considered one of the most callous and hopelessly abandoned, and the warders found him almost intractable. But one day he caught a mouse, a weak, terrified, hunted thing, like himself, and its helpless frailty, and the similarity of its condition with his own, appealed to him, and started into flame the divine spark of sympathy, which smoldered in his crime-hardened heart, and which no human touch had ever wakened into life. He kept the mouse in an old boot in his cell, fed, tended it, and loved it, and in his love for the weak and helpless, he forgot and lost his hatred for the strong. His heart and hand were no longer against his fellows. He became tractable and obedient to the uttermost. The warders could not understand his change. It seemed to them little short of miraculous that this most hardened of all criminals should be suddenly transformed into the likeness of a gentle, obedient child. Even the expression of his features altered remarkably. A pleasing smile began to play around the mouth, which had formerly been moved to nothing better than a cruel grin, and the implacable hardness of his eyes disappeared, and gave place to a soft, deep, mellow light. The criminal was a criminal no longer. He was saved, converted, clothed, and in his right mind, restored to humaneness and to humanity, and set firmly on the pathway to divinity by pitying and caring for a defenseless creature. All this was made known to the warder shortly afterwards, when on his discharge he took the mouse away with him. Thus sympathy bestowed increases its store in our own hearts, and enriches and fructifies our own life. Sympathy given is blessedness received. Sympathy withheld is blessedness forfeited. In the measure that a man increases and enlarges his sympathy, so much nearer does he approach the ideal life, the perfect blessedness. And when his heart has become so mellowed that no hard, bitter, or cruel thought can enter and detract from its permanent sweetness, then indeed is he richly and divinely blessed.